So in Genesis 11, it talks about another biblical misconception, not necessarily talking about it, but it's the Tower of Babylon, Babel, just when God divided the people so they don't speak one language. Now, this is probably my favorite biblical misconception, and I will probably say that about everything. But this one is more of my favorite than the last I was talking about, is Noah. The Tower of Babylon. I believe I'm just going to read the whole thing here for you. So if you don't know what it's about, this is the story. It starts in Genesis 11. At one time, the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us make over-fired bricks." They used bricks for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that the men were building. The Lord said, "If they have begun to do this as one people, all having the same language, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible." God speaking here, "Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." So from there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name is called Babylon. For there, the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. I'm reading the Holman Bible. Now, to sum the story up, I know it's not a very long story in the first place. It's, how much Genesis 11 is there? It's half of a chapter in Genesis. So, the Tower of Babylon, they were building a tower to reach heaven, to gain access to heaven without having to be saved or anything. You can imagine not being a Christian and being a worldly, secular person and saying, "I'm going to heaven, but I don't have to be saved to get heaven. I'm going to build a tower to get there." And if that sounds as crazy as it actually sounds to me, to you, then you're going to realize that what was the Tower of Babylon? Was it actually just a tower? You think that by brick and mortar they were building a Empire State Building. Back in Genesis 11 days, they were building just a tall pyramid. But this was going to give them access to heaven. And, of course, that's what the story says here in this version. But here's my question. This is what I'm presenting to you as the biblical misconception part, is how were they going to reach heaven that way? And if the first thing you think is, well, of course, they weren't going to. If they weren't going to reach heaven, then why did God say we have to stop them? Because as one language moving as basically one person, one body of people, they could accomplish anything they put their mind to. So you're telling me that they could put brick and mortar and build a structure into heaven. To present that even crazier, heaven is not just above the surface of the earth like astronauts have gone to the moon. They didn't pass through heaven. Heaven isn't in the Van Allen belt of radiation around the world. It's not the magnetic field. So if the astronauts that went to the moon didn't pass or weren't in heaven, and even that, could you imagine building a tower to the moon? Well, you have to build a brick tower past. Well, if we sent a Voyager space probe past Pluto, okay, well, it didn't end up in heaven. So you're telling me that they were going to build a brick and mortar that was past that. Well, first of all, there's not enough material on Earth to do that. Much less saying that they were actually going to reach heaven this way. So what was the Tower of Babylon? When you read your Bible, you have to ask questions. Like I said last time, ask questions. God's not going to be offended by your questions. Because if you don't ask questions, how are you going to ever get an answer? How are you just going to read this story of the Tower of Babylon in Genesis 11 as it's just a Bible story? These Bible stories, and it's a Bible story. Because you read it and you've been taught it throughout your whole life. For me, I've been taught it as a kid growing up in Sunday school. And you hear these stories and they're just awesome stories, but it's almost been presented in the way that they would never happen again today, or they're these mythical stories. I think it's easier for people to believe, like in Greek mythology, thinking of giants walking on the land. Or in a different religion, thinking that it's easier to believe the ways that works than to want to accept the fact that Christianity, that the Bible, gets really weird. It starts out really weird in Genesis, and it ends probably even weirder in Revelation. And we kind of just pick the middle stuff out, or the verses that really have a good impact, or verses that look really good on a little square thing on Facebook, and they just really hit home to the general public. But we don't address the fact or go deeper in something like this as to what was the Tower of Babel.